You remember the silence, most of all. It was a Tuesday. You were probably doing something completely forgettable. Maybe you were making coffee. Maybe you were stuck in traffic. The world was loud then, a constant hum of engines and voices. Then it stopped, not all at once. It was a creeping quiet that stole into the world. You looked up from your screen. The car horns outside had faded. The distant rumble of a train was gone. It was just quiet, a deep, unnatural stillness that made the hairs on your arms stand up. You went to the window. You expected to see empty streets. Instead, you saw everyone else standing still. They were all looking up. So you looked up too. That was your first mistake. Or maybe it was your first real choice. The sky was breaking. It was the only way to describe it. Thin, black lines spread across the blue. They looked like cracks in a sheet of glass. They grew without a sound. They branched out like frost on a cold pane. You felt a tremor in your chest, not of sound, but of something far deeper, a vibration that shook your bones. Then pieces of the sky began to fall away, not like debris. They dissolved. They revealed something behind the blue, something dark and wrong. It was a field of impossible angles, of shapes that your mind refused to hold. In the darkness were ships. They were not made of metal. They seemed carved from emptiness itself. Geometric puzzles that floated with serene menace. No lights, no engines, no sign of any propulsion you could name. They simply were. They had replaced your sky with their silent, terrible presence. And you knew, with a certainty that chilled you to your soul, that nothing would ever be the same again. You stood there, a statue among millions. Every person on the planet was frozen in that same moment. They saw the same shattered sky. They felt the same cold dread. The age of noise was over. The age of silence had begun, and you were there to witness its birth. The silence held for what felt like an eternity, long enough for the shock to curdle into 1,000 different questions, long enough for the first brave or foolish souls to raise their phones. They tried to record the impossible sight above, as if a picture could capture the end of a world. Then the voice came. It was not a sound that traveled through the air. It did not come from your television or your radio. It bloomed inside your head. A calm, perfectly modulated tone that spoke to everyone at once, in every language, in a voice that was neither male nor female. It was the voice of pure, cold logic. It did not say hello. It did not offer greetings. It did not declare war. Declarations of war are for equals. This was something else entirely. It was an announcement, a statement of fact, like a scientist noting an observation in a lab book. You are the harvest. It echoed in the private space of your thoughts. These were the first words humanity heard from the stars. Not a message of peace, not a threat of conquest. Just a simple, horrifying classification. You were not a species to be negotiated with. You were a crop to be gathered. The message was short. It did not need to be long. Its meaning was absolute. The beings in the silent ships were not invaders. They were farmers. And this planet, your home, was their field. They had watched you grow. They had waited for you to ripen. Now, the time for collection had come. Imagine the sheer, cosmic arrogance. To cross the void between stars. To break the sky of a living world. And to announce your intentions with the detached air of a grocer. It was so far beyond human experience that at first your mind simply refused. It was a prank, a mass hallucination, someone's terrible idea of a joke. But the ships remained. The silence outside was still absolute. the voice in your head felt more real than your own heartbeat. It explained that resistance was a biological inevitability, a predictable spasm in the crop. It would be handled with efficiency. There was no malice in its tone. You do not hate the wheat when you swing the scythe. A second message followed. A simple visual instruction. It showed your cities. New York, Tokyo, London. It showed them turning to gray dust. The voice explained this was the most humane method. A quick and painless process of disassembly. They were sorry for the minimal waste. Minimal waste. They were apologizing for how they would unmake your world. That was when the denial broke. That was when the screaming started. But it was only inside your head. The real world remained perfectly, terrifyingly still. You were not being conquered. You were being consumed. And the universe, it seemed, did not care at all. The voice fell silent. The instruction had been delivered. Now came the demonstration. You waited. Every person on Earth waited. Every soldier was at their post. Every leader was in a bunker. They had spent a century building weapons to fight each other. Now, those weapons turned to face the silent gods in the sky. You watched it happen on your screen. Or maybe you saw it from your own rooftop. The first jets scrambled. Streaks of white climbed toward the impossible ships. They were the best you had. Machines built for speed and power. They looked like angry insects buzzing around a mountain. The pilots were brave. You have to give them that. They flew their craft into the face of the unknown. They fired their missiles, little sparks of human defiance against the dark. The missiles streaked toward the alien vessels and vanished. They did not explode. They did not bounce off a shield. They simply ceased to exist. One moment they were there, the next they were not. No explosion, no flash, just a quiet removal from reality. The jets flew closer. Perhaps they thought a different weapon would work. Perhaps they were just too stunned to turn back. You saw one of the lead fighters approach a vast, triangular ship. It got within a few miles. And then the jet dissolved, like sugar in hot water. The pilot, the metal, the fuel, all of it just faded into nothing. The other pilots saw it. They must have. But they kept coming. Humanity's finest, our sharpened spear. They were erased one by one from the sky. No debris fell. No parachutes bloomed. It was a quiet, orderly sanitization. An adult brushing away gnats. Then it was the turn of the weapons on the ground. Silos opened across the world. The great powers launched their star breakers, nuclear missiles, the ultimate promise of human destruction. They rose on pillars of fire and smoke, a final, desperate roar against the dying of the light. They reached for the sky, a forest of them. They never made it. Halfway to the silent fleet, they all stopped. They hung in the air for a single, breathtaking second. Frozen, defeated. Then they fell back to Earth, inert and useless. The aliens had not destroyed them. They had simply turned them off, like a child flipping a switch. That was the moment you knew. Truly knew. Your greatest weapons were toys. Your strongest shields were paper. The pillars of your civilization were built on sand. And the tide was coming in. The voice in your head had called it a demonstration. They were right. You had been shown your place. The cities went next, just as the message had promised. You watched a live feed from a news helicopter. It hovered over a city you knew, a place of millions, a monument of steel and glass. One of the alien ships descended. It was impossibly large. It blotted out the sun. It did not fire a laser. It did not drop a bomb. A wave of something shimmered from its underside. a distortion in the air. The wave expanded, silent and slow. As it passed over the buildings, they crumbled, not into fire and rubble. They turned into a fine gray powder. Skyscrapers, bridges, stadiums, all reduced to dust that drifted on the wind. There were no screams, no explosions, just a quiet, inexorable erasure. You watched the city disappear, an entire history of art and love and ambition, gone in seconds, turned into a cloud of pale gray dust. You were watching the end of your world, and all you could do was stand there, breathing. The days that followed were a blur of gray dust and red sunsets. The air tasted of concrete and regret. The silent ships patrolled the broken skies. They were methodical. They moved from one population center to the next. They performed their quiet, terrible work. The harvest had begun. You survived. Maybe through luck. Maybe you lived somewhere they considered unimportant, a place not worth the effort of unmaking. You learned to live in the rubble, to scavenge for food, to fear the silent shadows that passed overhead. Hope was a currency you could no longer afford. Then, something impossible happened. Something fell. You were huddled with a small group of other survivors. You were filtering rainwater through a dirty cloth. Suddenly, a new sound broke the silence. A shriek, a tearing of air that was utterly alien. You all looked up, expecting death. Instead, you saw a line of fire arcing across the sky. One of the smaller alien machines, a scout perhaps, was falling. It was out of control. It trailed smoke and a strange, violet energy. It was broken. Something had gone wrong. For the first time you saw them fail, it crashed a few miles away. A deep, resonant boom echoed through the ruins, not the quiet disassembly you were used to. This was a violent, chaotic impact, a flaw in their cold perfection, a scratch on their flawless armor. For the first time in weeks, you felt something other than fear. You felt a flicker of savage curiosity. Someone in your group, a former engineer named Anya, spoke first. Her voice was a croak. "We have to see it." It was a crazy idea, suicidal even. The other ships would surely come for their fallen comrade. They would sterilize the entire area. But the alternative was to sit here yet and wait for your turn to become dust. You went. You ran through the skeletal remains of streets. You scrambled over piles of debris. Your lungs burned. Your heart hammered against your ribs. It was a race against the silent gods in the sky. To get there before they did. To see the one thing they never wanted you to see. A mistake. You found the crash site in a crater of fused glass and scorched earth. The ship was smaller than you imagined. Maybe the size of a bus. It was shaped like a polished river stone. But one side was ripped open. Jagged edges of the black material were exposed. Violet light pulsed weakly from within. It was bleeding. There was no time to think. You and Anya and a handful of others scrambled down into the crater. The air was thick with ozone and another smell you could not place. A clean, sterile smell, like a hospital for machines. You reached the breach in the hull. You peered inside. It was not a cockpit. There were no chairs, no controls, no screens. The interior was a dense lattice of crystalline fibers. They glowed with that same faint, violet light. It was beautiful, and it was utterly inhuman. There was no pilot. There was no crew. The ship itself was the creature. Anya pointed with a trembling finger. "There," she whispered. In the heart of the glowing lattice was a void, a sphere of perfect blackness about the size of a human head. The fibers around it were shattered. They had been severed from the central core. That must have been the source of the crash. You reached out. A foolish, instinctive gesture. As your fingers neared the black sphere, you felt a pull. Not physical. It was a pull on your thoughts. A cold, logical inquiry. It felt like a computer trying to access a network. It was searching for a connection, and it was not finding one. It's disconnected, Anya breathed. It can't talk to the others. That was it. The ship wasn't just a machine. It was a node, a part of a larger mind, a single, unified consciousness that ran all their technology. And this one had been cut off. It was alone. Suddenly, the cold inquiry from the sphere changed. It felt confused. It was trying to process its isolation, its unexpected individuality. It was a state it was never designed to experience. It was an error condition, a bug in their perfect system. And in that moment of alien confusion, you understood. You had found their weakness. It wasn't a vulnerability in their armor. It was a flaw in their soul, or the lack of one. They were a collective, a single, flawless mind. They were perfect. They were united. And you finally knew how you were going to break them. You were going to teach them how to be alone. The discovery changed everything. It was a single spark in a world of ash. You and your small group of survivors knew you had something precious, something more valuable than food or water. You had a weapon, a key to unlocking their downfall. But you were just a few people in a dead city. News of the fallen ship spread not by broadcasts, but by whispers. Runners, brave souls who risked the open roads, carried the tale from one pocket of survivors to the next. The story grew with each telling. It became a legend, the tale of the broken god, the machine that learned to be afraid. Soon, others came looking for you. Not soldiers from the old armies. Those armies were gone. These were new people, leaders forged in the ruins. They were engineers like Anya. They were doctors who had treated the wounded. They were teachers who now taught survival. They were the ones who had not broken. They found you in a makeshift camp in the shell of an old library. They came with scavenged supplies and hungry minds. A woman named Eva seemed to be their leader. She had been a professor of systems theory, a title that seemed like a joke just a month ago. Now, it was the most important job in the world. Eva looked at the crystalline fragments you had salvaged from the ship. She listened to Anya's explanation of the network, the single, collective mind. She did not look at you with doubt. She looked at you with a terrifying intensity. "They are one," she said. "We are many. That has always been our weakness. Now, it will be our strength." Her plan was simple and completely insane. If their strength was their unity, you had to attack that unity. You couldn't fight their ships. That was suicide. You had to fight their mind. You had to introduce the one thing their perfect logic could not handle: chaos, doubt, individuality. They called for volunteers, not for soldiers to fire guns. They needed people to help take apart the alien technology, to understand its language, to figure out how to turn their own network against them. It was a call to arms for the desperate, a chance to do more than just survive, a chance to fight back. You answered the call. You had seen the inside of that ship. You had felt that cold, searching mind. You knew this was the only path. You joined Eva's growing band of thinkers and tinkerers. Your new home was a hidden bunker, an old government facility that the aliens had somehow missed. Down there, in the quiet hum of generators, a new kind of war began. Not with bombs, but with ideas. Your job was to help the engineers understand the fallen drone. You were the eyewitness. You described the feeling of its mind reaching out, the confusion you sensed when it found itself alone. You became a living piece of data in their strange new science. The bunker became a hive of activity. People worked in shifts around the clock. They lived on stale rations and black coffee. They argued over complex equations on whiteboards. They were building something, a weapon unlike any other. A weapon aimed not at a ship's hull, but at its mind. You watched them work, and for the first time since the sky broke, you felt the fragile, stubborn bloom of hope. The centerpiece of your new world was the alien itself, not the whole ship, just pieces. The salvage teams had managed to recover more than just the core. They brought back sections of the crystalline lattice, and more importantly, they brought back one of their ground units, a soldier. It had been found deactivated near the crash site, its connection to the hive mind severed. Now it lay on a massive steel table in the main lab. It was not something you could call a robot. It was too elegant for that, too organic in its design. It was a construct, a thing of smooth, dark surfaces and unsettling grace. Your job was to help with the dissection, not with a scalpel. Ava and her team were afraid to damage its systems. The dissection was done with sensors and scanners. You helped them map its internal structure, to trace the pathways of energy that animated it. It was like drawing a map of a nightmare. The soldier was bipedal, roughly human in shape, but it had no face. Just a smooth, featureless head. Its limbs were long and slender. They ended not in hands, but in multi-jointed appendages that could become tools or weapons. There was a terrible beauty in its efficiency. As you mapped its insides, you found no organs, no circulatory system, no biology at all. It was powered by a miniature version of the ship's core, a small, cold sphere of blackness in its chest. It was a puppet, a remote terminal for the vast mind in the sky. It had no thoughts of its own, no feelings, no fear. Anya believed that was its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. It does not need to think, she explained one night, her face lit by a monitor. Its actions are controlled by the central intelligence. The perfect tactical decision is relayed instantly. It can't make a mistake. So, how do we fight it? You asked. She smiled, a rare and weary thing. We don't fight it, she said. We fight the signal, if we can interrupt the connection even for a second. What happens to the puppet when the strings are cut? That became the new focus. Jamming. But not just any jamming. You couldn't just flood the air with noise. Their communication was too advanced. You had to craft a specific message, a piece of data that would look like a command. But when the soldier's core tried to process it, it would create a logical paradox, a feedback loop. You were helping to build a logic bomb, a virus made of pure information. The idea was to send the soldier a command that contradicted its core programming. Something like, protect yourself by destroying yourself. A human mind could see the paradox. A purely logical mind, they hoped, would freeze. It would lock itself into an endless, recursive loop. Days turned into weeks. The work was slow, tedious. Every success was met with a dozen new problems. Above you, the world continued to die. You heard reports from the runners. More cities turned to dust. The harvest was proceeding on schedule. Sometimes, the weight of it all was too much. You would find a quiet corner of the bunker and just breathe. But then you would look at the alien soldier on the table. You would remember its silent, mindless grace. You remembered the voice in your head, the cold, dismissive tone of a farmer. And a different feeling would push the despair away. A hot, stubborn anger, the part of you that refused to be a crop, the part of you that was still, defiantly, human. You were not just building a weapon. You were writing an argument that you had the right to exist, and you were going to deliver it personally.